Environmental Protection Agency published a new rule on coal ash storage. It's called the Coal Combustion Residuals Rule. It takes effect soon, and it's going to have some implications for TVA. So we're considering this rule and determining how best we can apply it, while being consistent with the mandate of low power costs and reliability and environmental stewardship. And one of those plants that will be affected is here in Alabama. Widows Creek Fossil Plant has 8 units. 7 of the 8 units are no longer operating. And the ash pond for the remaining unit, Unit 7, will reach full capacity in the spring of 2016. Chief Operating Officer Chip Pardee will discuss this later in the meeting, and we'll ask the board to delegate the authority to management and set a retirement date for that unit earlier than we had planned. We've been discussing this with our employees at the plant and with community leaders, and we understand the impact of such changes. We will continue sharing information as it develops. Now, I understand that my fellow employees at Widow Creeks are listening to or watching this presentation, so now I want to take the opportunity to speak to you directly. Our retirement of coal plants, including Widows Creek 7, has and will have a hard effect on many of the people who work at those plants. I realize this will be hard on and for many of you. The board realizes this. We labor over these decisions that are not made lightly. They're made in the best interest of the vast TVA system, but they have individual difficult aspects. So, a personal note here, I appreciate what you do. I appreciate you. There's a lot of work to do before the plant retires. There'll be a lot of work to do on the site afterwards. So as always, let's be safe. And let's have the high level of performance we've come to expect from you.
At this point in time, I've asked our Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Chip Pardee, to present management's recommendation on this topic. Chip.
Okay, thank you, Director McWhorter, Mr. Chair, members of the board. First, Richard, to go back to some of your questions, I'd be remiss to not point out that we have a marvelous staff here across TVA, including in operations. And what is often the case, you tell people what you expect of them, give them the tools, lay out the long term of where we're going, and turn them loose, and they do great things for us, and that's exactly what you see happening here. So I appreciate John's comments and the like, but that I think is solely a reflection on our collective ability, including the right resources from the board, to be able to keep the long view with our assets and invest in forward improvements, and it will pay off for us. So we have a long way to go yet, but I'm optimistic about the direction and the pace, and we'll keep at it. So I'm before you today to talk about specifically the Widows Creek site, but before I get into the details around our recommendation to the board, I did want to pick up on some comments that Bill had made, and as well express my appreciation to the past and present employees at Widows Creek. There's almost 6 decades of and a marvelous legacy of safe and reliable and low-cost operation there. And we recognize that the uncertainty around the future of the Widows Creek Station is one more very significant distraction for the plant staff, and they've continued, despite that uncertainty, to focus on high-quality operations for the last year, yesterday, today, they will tomorrow, and certainly we want to express our appreciation to the plant staff. We also know that this is, when the time comes to cease operation, that this is a significant impact on the local community. And for both our plant employees and the community post-operations, we will enter a period where we have very significant investment in the region for decommissioning activities, for deconstruction activities, to stabilize our ash impoundments and the like. So we will see activities there at the site for a marked period of time as we stabilize the site and return it to a useful condition. So while I realize that doesn't entirely ameliorate the impacts on plant staff or the local community, we are committed to minimize the impacts on people and their families and the like as we work our way through the transition periods. With that, I'll provide just a little background on the Widows Creek Station. There are 8 units there, 7 of which are no longer in operations. Construction started In 1953, the last plant was completed in about 1965. And as you can see on the screen or in the materials, units 1 through 6 were retired earlier this decade as a consequence of the EPA's consent decree that we entered into with the EPA and others. And that left only units 7 and 8 in operation. Unit 8 was authorized for retirement by the board in November of 2013. And we ceased operation on Unit 8 last fall, the fall of 2014, and that left only Unit 7 in operation. And the lifetime of Unit 7, as Bill had pointed out, has been determined by our capacity to store ash there on site, safely and in an environmentally benign fashion. And as we continue to examine our capabilities, and with the advent of the new coal combustion residuals rule that I will speak to in a moment, we realize that our ability to store ash would limit the usable lifetime of the plant, not from our 2019 planning horizon, but into year 2016 originally. And Bill commented upon that briefly during his opening remarks. So that left the management of Widows Creek site centered around Unit 7 and our ability to safely and effectively store ash in an environmentally sound fashion. Next slide, please. So the coal combustion residue rule was first signed in December of last year and was published last month in April of 2015. And there are a number of requirements associated with that rule that compound the complexities of continuing to operate the ash impoundment facilities there at Widows Creek. Those regulations are going to be expensive to implement, but the regulation also provides for the option to retire an ash impoundment facility earlier if the generation equipment on site as well is retired, and then we are not required to be in compliance with that specific regulation, although there are other regulations that we are required to be in compliance with as we move through the process of closing the ash ponds. So we looked at options around our compliance with the coal combustion residue rule, continued plant operations, and the financial investment required to be in compliance with the new regulation. We looked at options of closing the ash retention facilities and moving the ash that we're producing from future operations to other disposal sites, as well as the option to close the plant. And it appears, after examining those options, that there are compelling reasons to close the plant later this year and then just begin the work of stabilizing the ash ponds, drying them out, making sure that we're in compliance with the rules that govern closed ash ponds, and begin decommissioning and deconstruction activities at the plant site. So our recommendation before you today is for the board to direct the Chief Executive Officer to retire Widows Creek Unit 7 at a date to be determined by him, but not later than October of 2015, when the coal combustion residue rules will go into effect for ash impoundments that are not being closed. And with that, I'll answer whatever questions you may have.
I have a question. Chip, could you elaborate somewhat on the efforts to minimize the effective closure of the employees?
So we have been looking at this plant closure and others for some time, and we realized that while that would otherwise create kind of a ladder effect in our staffing, we have been able to, by carefully monitoring our attrition and presenting the opportunity for employees to move elsewhere within the TVA system, which in some instances is a welcome opportunity, in others that would require our employees to perhaps move from an area from which they have never lived away from. So with that in mind, we have tried to, as early as possible and to the greatest extent possible, offer opportunities elsewhere in the system as within our power operations, our fossil and hydro fleet, as well as the nuclear fleet and other areas. And those postings for additional jobs have gone out routinely. We've been meeting with employees to try to prepare them for what they can expect for future opportunities, what training that may involve, the location of future opportunities and such, in order to try to flatten the curve as we do have to either relocate our employees or employees may choose not to remain with us as a consequence. We also know that in the instance of Widow's Creek that we're going to have a lot of activity on site once we do reach the day where we cease operations, and I think that will as well allow us to minimize the impacts to employees. I can't say there will be no impact, but at least our best attempt is to minimize impacts to the employees so that they do have options that they can pursue either on site or elsewhere.
People of Jackson County have been impacted by our decisions in the last few years. This is the second decision on Widow's Creek, and we certainly have to know about the slowdown in Belmont. We do have 4 representatives from Jackson County with us today. They all are very close friends. I see them regularly. And we know that there are employees that are being impacted in businesses like yours, Mr. Adams, that are going to be affected by these decisions. As you may know, some of you would not have much choice about the EPA and the CCR rules, but there have been changes in our industry that make some of these things necessary, and these are always the most difficult decisions. I have found that TVA is heavily focused on what is going on in Jackson County area. I know that they work closely on the weeds issue. They have also bringing in people to help find better ways to take advantage of the beautiful recreation areas you have and enhance industrial development efforts. I know this doesn't help those that lose their job and those that are being impacted, but I can assure you that this board is extremely sensitive to those that are being impacted. We will do everything we know how to try to alleviate the pain in any way that's under our control. As I said earlier, these are impacting our friends. These are always the hardest decisions to be involved in. And while it's the right thing to do, it doesn't make it easier. Any other further comments? All in favor of approving the motion behind tab 8? Please second. All in favor of approving the item behind tab 8? Aye. Opposed? Items approved.